Hey gang, happy Tuesday and welcome back to another episode here at the Blockchain Report, the only show where geopolitics, economics, and Costco-sized drama all collide before you've even finished your morning coffee. Today, we have got a wild lineup in store for you. We're talking about U.S. envoys flying off to meet with Vladimir Putin because apparently ending a war is now something you workshop in Florida with Marco Rubio and Jared Kushner like it's a startup pitch or something. We're breaking down the investigation into Hong Kong's deadliest fire in nearly 80 years, a tragedy so shocking it's testing the city's entire political structure. And yes, Costco is suing the Trump administration for tariff refunds, proving once and for all that nothing unites Americans like our wholesale clubs demanding their money back. So let's get started with today's news. Are we running a stinger? We don't have to do it. New formats. We're figuring things out here. All right, well, it's time for this morning's Bull Run where we go over the top stories of the day. So let's get into it with story numero uno. As Donald Trump says there's a good chance the U.S. can help broker a deal to end Russia's war in Ukraine after high-level talks in Florida, of all places. It's an optimistic tone for sure. Especially given that Russia is still launching missiles like they're trying to run out the warehouse inventory or something. The talks involve Secretary of State Marco Rubio, envoy Steve Witkoff, and yes, Jared Kushner. Because nothing says international war diplomacy quite like adding your son-in-law for good measure. Now, Rubio said that progress was made, but emphasized the negotiations are delicate, complicated, and nowhere close to finished, which is exactly how everyone describes assembling IKEA furniture, let alone ending a full-scale war. Now, Witkoff is heading to Moscow to meet Putin, while Ukrainian negotiator Rustem Umerov briefs Zelensky in Europe. Now, Ukraine wants genuine security guarantees and a ceasefire based on current lines. Russia wants Ukraine to withdraw from territories Putin claims as his own. Now, to put it lightly, these positions are not currently holding hands. Meanwhile, Russia continues drone and missile strikes, and Ukraine keeps targeting Russian tankers and infrastructure in the Black Sea. So the diplomatic soundtrack is mostly explosions at this point. Trump's optimism feels a little inspirational, saying there's a good chance of peace while Kiev is literally still on fire. Is the foreign policy version of saying, I think the date went well, while the restaurant behind you is still very much smoking. But both sides do seem to be shifting expectations. Ukraine's former top general is even acknowledging publicly that wars don't always end with clean victories, which is a significant change in tone, and sometimes tone is the first sign of movement. Now, the whole situation now hinges on whether these negotiations can create an actual pathway to peace before battlefield realities overrule them. All right, joining us to chat about this story and many more this morning, we have the man that knows how to connect the dots like no one else, Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us this morning. How are you?
Great to see you on the show earlier, Hank. I'm glad you were there.
Oh man, I got to tell you, Nolan, your optimism is contagious, my friend. I'm glad you're feeling good about the future. I'm kind of in the middle right now. Did we lose him? Uh-oh.
Oh, I'm there. I feel like I'm happy.
We got you back. Little scrambly here on the interwebs this morning.
Yeah, I was on the X feed. I was on your X feed and it was looking a little weird.
1 second here, Nolan. We're having some connection problems here. Do I got you back? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I haven't had any trouble on my end.
Okay.
You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm glad it's good on your end. And Nolan, we got a lot to talk about this morning, specifically with this Trump, Ukraine, Russia situation. The U.S. is now sending envoys to meet directly with Putin after these talks in Florida, even as Russia continues missile strikes. So, Nolan, when you see diplomacy happening in the middle of active bombing, what does that tell you about how great powers actually end wars in the real world? Like, what do you feel like is actually going on here? What is the temperature you're gauging right now?
The number one story in Ukraine was the arrest or investigation of the chief of staff of Zelensky over the weekend. And what that really signals is the Zelensky administration is completely removed from the conversation. It looks like there is a tacit European approval of that. Because once you start getting a investigation into the money that was given to the administration, how it was spent, you're really occupying that administration with all of those fights and not war. So they're forcing them into the Ukrainian democracy conversation with that. Now, I don't know what the results are going to be, but that's removing them from the peace process. So that's why you're getting the bilateral American-Russia conversations going on. Now, again, in America's case, I think everything comes down to finance. It looks like Trump monetized their desire to fight in that if they keep fighting, America will make money. So he's stopped paying for the bill. Europe has to pay the bill, and America gets to make money off of them fighting. So instead of spending, America's making money. Then Trump went around and cut off the Indian oil. The Indian oil is important because Russia was still finding its markets using India, using that as a conduit. So you got to look at the money. They need money to fight a war. They're not getting money. Ukraine's not getting any more money. They can buy more US weapons, which will give money to America, and that's fine. But Europe has to spend the money. Europe is saying they don't want to spend the money. And so it looks like they are not going to have the capital to fight. And it does look like there are last-ditch efforts in order to keep the war going because people definitely do want to make money off this war on a number of levels.
Right.
So you got to follow the money. It looks like the money is over. It looks like the carrot will continue to be offered to Putin. More or less, you're going to be able to go to Alaska to exploit resources there. They're giving Putin the biggest off-ramp they could give him in order to push this stuff forward. So I continue to see things as pretty business as usual in the sense that it looks like we're on the path to peace. It looks like there's going to be a separate conversation about Ukrainian democracy reform, what happened, follow the money. They're being carved out of the peace process, and on the actual peace process end, it's going to be bilateral between the United States and Russia. And it's economic.
Right. Yeah, I mean, things like this there's a really complicated geopolitical matrix we're having to kind of navigate right now, especially when it comes to the terms that each side feels like they're going to need in order to put an end to this. The Ukraine is demanding security guarantees and no loss of territory, while Russia wants Ukraine to withdraw from regions that Putin claims as his own. So, Nolan, from your geopolitical lens, how do negotiations work when both sides want things that literally contradict each other? Because I just don't know how confident I feel that things are going to get settled when they both seem to be drawing pretty staunch lines in the sand right now.
So I think that's going to come down to kicking that one down the road, and kicking that can down the road, in the sense that they're going to try and stop the fighting and then decide the democratic or jurisdictional questions later once the dust has settled a bit. So maybe 4 or 5 years. And if you do it in 4 or 5 years, they're not just going to pick up where they left off fighting-wise. They're going to have less reason to go to the battlefront. They're going to have less incentive to start the fight up again. So it looks like this is just a way to kind of trick everyone into peace, including the leaders of both of the groups. So it doesn't look like a solvable problem. It doesn't look like you're going to be able to just decide today, from now on, this is Russia or this is Ukraine. But you're going to be able to offer this, circumstance, let's say. Now, I was talking on my show today because both Mike Benz, who is a big sort of forensic auditor of cash flows around the world, and you also saw Preston Byrne. Preston Byrne was an early journalist with me at CoinDesk, but really he was a law student at the time. He's been called to both the New York bar and the bar in the United Kingdom. He's the big person fighting against the Online Information Act in Europe. So he's, American, British kind of guy. And he was retweeting everything about what Mike Benz said today. Apparently, this whole censorship world that we live in, the algorithmic bumping, everything we've experienced in the New York Times or legacy media or on Google or on YouTube, the algorithmic preponderance of legacy news finding its way to the top of the search engine. All of that actually started, according to what was published today by Mike Benz, repeated by Preston Byrne. Everything went back to the 2014 referendum about Donetsk in Ukraine that really triggered this war. And apparently, the story goes like this. They thought they could win that fight. And before that, the internet was just Wild West, maximum freedom, maximum, whatever you want goes. It's not a publisher, it's the internet, all that Section 230 stuff. Everything that happened after, because they lost the referendum, because Russia won that referendum, the people of that area voted to stay with Russia. Now, I have no idea about the credibility of the election. I have no way to verify what happened or audit that election. Who knows what happened? People say it was legitimate, though those people are Russian. And apparently, that's why this election question still remains a big point. Preston Byrne's exact words today talking about that was, all of internet censorship flows directly from that election. Everything we've understood about the election, about the internet to this day, was actually crystallized in that period of 2014 around this election time. So that's when the algorithmic bumping, that's the point at which the legacy news started getting the algo bump to put them at the top of the search. In the old days, if you went on YouTube and typed in news stories, CNN wasn't the first thing that popped up. Now it is. That was a result of 2014, according to them. So the election is a big deal. And if the American side is saying we're going to push that election further, that's a pretty good sign that we are going to get peace, because this really is the biggest and most contentious part of the whole conversation. Kicking it down the road like that makes a lot of sense if you want to get peace today.
Yeah, and kicking it down the road kind of makes me feel like when I was a kid and my sister and I would get into a fight, my mom said, you go each sit in your corners for 10 minutes and cool down. So it kind of feels like they're just like, hey, everybody chill out and cool down. And in 5 years from now, as opposed to 5 minutes, you're going to be a lot less incentivized to get back into a brutal war. Is that kind of what is maybe happening right now? It's like you all just need to chill out and let the adults kind of figure out a way to solve this without fighting?
I would put one more thing on it. It's the parents are being even trickier. In this case, they're saying you sit in the corner and stop fighting, or else you're going to have to give me all your lunch money. They're bullying them a bit too. So Trump is doing the bully thing. He's making money off of them. If they want to keep fighting, they got to pay him. If they want to stop fighting, they'll get money. So he's adding the incentives to the mix as well. So it is similar to that, though. Yes.
Yeah, he is a bit of a bully, which can be good or bad. I don't know, depending on the context, I suppose. You know, and Trump keeps saying that there is, in fact, a good chance for this peace deal, even though the situation on the ground, we're still seeing attacks as looking worse every week. How do you read that optimism? Because you think, based on what you're seeing, there likely is going to be a solution in the not too distant future. So are Trump's words genuine signal right now, or is this maybe political messaging that doesn't quite match the battlefield right now?
Well, it doesn't match.
How are you reading that situation?
You're dealing with a situation where mostly robots are fighting the war. Now, I know there's real casualties and people are dying, but because it's robots, of course, there are people who don't want the fighting to end, either through hatred. That's a big factor here. I think Trump has mentioned he was surprised about how much hatred there was. And the hatred thing sort of takes away some of the financial incentives that he's trying to manipulate people with. So when you put it in the context of robots are doing the fighting and drones are doing the fighting, you're hearing on the other end, on the human level, a lot of people saying they're deserting, right? They're saying, well, this war looks like it's ending. It's not worth it. I'm not going to risk my life for the last week of this war. So you're hearing as many stories about defections on the human front as you are hearing about these drone incursions. So because some of the fighting is done with robots, it is one of the first ever robot wars humans have been involved in. And because there's a robot war component to it, you can actually hide the same directional incentives we would normally understand, like a human going to the front and fighting, doesn't apply because it's just some guy in a room who hit a button and it creates this butterfly effect. So to me, it's not exactly skin in the game, and it shows that we're more in a robot war than we've ever been. And so the normal tea leaves of are they still fighting? I think the human story about humans defecting and abandoning their posts are way up this week. I've seen a few anecdotes. Now it's fog of war, so there could be fake news, but I have seen on X stories of more and more desertion, more and more people saying, "Oh, the war's over. I'm not going to fight anymore." Because honestly, if you were a soldier, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what side. If I hear Trump saying the war's over next week, I'm kind of not going to my fighting post where I could die. Like that'd be like the worst thing that could
Right.
happen. I'm taking the court martial
Right.
and I'm hoping for the best, right? So
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy.
I,
We're living in this Attack of the Clones world right now. And yeah, I wouldn't feel very incentivized either if Trump is saying this, the robots are fighting. But I will tell you this, I will not stand for another innocent Rizbot being killed in this needless and senseless war. It's just, I'm not okay with it. There are better things he can be doing with his time.
I
You know,
want
but
the
one
robot.
big,
I
go
got
ahead.
clothes to fold. I got
The
stuff
robot?
to do and around the house. I need the robots. I want them now. Peace. Robots for peace.
Right. Wasn't there a show called Robot Wars where they fought robots? Who would have thought that was going to be like the experimental phase before we sent those things into war to fight each other where the stakes were actually very high? Wild world we're living in today, Nolan. You know, and one big development from all this that we saw is that Ukraine's former top general said that wars don't always end with a clean victory. So my question for you is like, what is a realistic non-storybook ending to this war? What do you think that actually looks like? What do you think? What are sides will you think going to be willing to concede? Is Ukraine going to have to give up some of their territory ultimately for this to end, or how do you kind of see this finalizing here?
Yeah, I think Ukraine will definitely have to give up some territory. It looks like a lot of the decisions about how to create Ukraine or what Ukraine was in the first place doesn't actually match with the real ethnic map that is there. I've heard Stalin made
Right.
some choices and they were really arbitrary and really random, and a whole big piece was added to it. And Russia definitely had the Crimea before, and they said, whoopsies, we didn't mean to give that to you. So I don't think they're ever getting them back. There is a whole, in the same way that they've got that little town, Russia has that little town on the Baltic Sea that isn't you can actually leave Russia, go to Estonia and Lithuania, and then on the coast there is a town that is Russian that is surrounded by not Russia. So it's land, not it's not an island. It's attached by
Right.
land. And the reason for that town to be there is because of the Baltic Fleet, so their navy that's there. It's the same thing with the Black Sea, and it's their way out into the Mediterranean, their way to get out into the ocean. They have a navy there. And if you look at the map of Russia, what they call the fleshy underbelly of Russia. There's a Great Plains, and you can march armies right into it. So Russia has always been exposed from that bottom, and that has always been their worry about NATO being on the borders. If you're going to do an invasion of Russia, that's where you do it. They're heavily protected. That's why
Gotcha.
Moscow is built above the tree line, right? Moscow is built in a place that's so far north because they want to see people coming, and it was their best defense. Whereas in the south, you don't quite have that. So they'll never allow that. That it will never happen. So it's existential for them to control that because they got the Caucasus after, and they can't be invaded from Persia, for example. There's too many mountains and all that. But this is a great, it's one of the greatest um, um, uh, agricultural pieces of land in the world as well. So the soil
Right.
there is like Virginia quality soil. So that's why you've got all of, that's why it's coveted and why you've got people there, but it's also weak because it's flat and you can march an army there. So there's no way that's going to happen. So I would say what looks good for Ukraine is that they are indeed welcomed because they're always left on their own in a way. They were cut. The reason why there's so many Bitcoiners in Ukraine, for example, Ukraine in the early days before the war was always known as the number one place in the world for Bitcoin uptake simply because they were cut off banking from the rest of Europe. Like your bank card, if you go to Europe, you use your bank card, and the Europeans come to America and they use their bank card, and everything works. They were so corrupt in Ukraine that their bank cards wouldn't work abroad. They were cut out of the networks. And so they had a huge use of Bitcoin for that reason because they were never really welcomed in Europe. That was the whole fight in 2014. Which side are they going to go on? Who's going to treat them better? And so it was all this beauty pageant of like, we'll do this for you. But Europe didn't really give a lot to Ukraine. So I'd say Europe really does need to extend an opening to Europe, like a European Union situation or more open borders for them, just more integration. Because if they're sitting there alone, they're going to be in big trouble and they're probably not going to make it. So what I think looks best
Yeah.
for Ukraine is to get back to, they want to be European, go for it. And, if you just give up a bit of territory where you're not even ethnically domiciled, where it's mostly destroyed anyway, no one's really living in a lot of these places. So more integration with Europe. And then on the other end, I would say if America's incentives towards Russia really bear fruit, we will see Russian oil exploitation in Alaska. We'll see a bunch of joint ventures between America and Russia. This America and Russia fighting for 100 years is really the story that has to end. We have to stop being enemies with Russia. There's no need for it. Now, I don't know if that means Putin retires or is gone or whatever, but we got to be able to get over this Russia, USA fighting. It's been way too long. They were naturalized. You go back to the Civil War and you realize that Abraham Lincoln wrote the Tsar of Russia to get his back, to get his support, right? Because a lot of the Civil War
Yeah.
was England funding the Confederates because it was better for England if America was fighting. And the thing that kept England from really coming and fighting the Union Army with the Confederates was Russia threatening Europe that if they did get involved in the American war, then they would come and kick their ass. And so we have a great history with Russia that doesn't need to go the way it has since the Communist Revolution. Russia and America have way more in common at this point than they have separating us. It makes all the sense in the world for America to get over the Cold War, to get over all the brainwashing that both Russians and Americans have experienced, and to come together in some way that is going to be great for everyone. And I think it should be an energy exploitation. We need their expertise on the north. So to me, a bridge between Alaska through the Bering Strait over to Russia, us driving our RVs and our camper vans into Siberia is ultimately what we want to see. And that is going to be the biggest sign of peace, that we can take a road trip to Russia from America and go and have all the whatever they eat over there and enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we need to move past and get on this war, or get past this war, start working together, and Russia needs to put the end of Rocky IV behind us. Ivan Drago was not the guy, and it's settled, okay? Rocky was the winner. We're there. All right, and you
I
mentioned
watched
some
Creed
big
2
trouble.
on the
I wanna move
airplane.
on to-
I watched Creed
how
2
was
on
it?
the airplane.
Okay.
It was so good. Yeah, I didn't know. I watched it on the way to
it good?
Buenos Aires. Yeah, it was so good. I did it. Ivan Drago's
nice.
kid. It's his kid.
Oh,
Ivan Drago's kid comes to fight Apollo Creed's kid in like a revenge. The
oh,
mother abandoned the kid, so the woman who abandoned him when
Yeah.
he lost, Ivan Drago, she's back.
incredible cinema.
She abandons the kid. That's why he loses. I don't know, spoiled it. That's the spoiler. She
Yeah.
leaves and he loses.
All right. Yeah. All right, we got to move on to our next story. Now, you mentioned big trouble previously, Nolan. There's some big trouble going on in our next one. Big trouble in Little Hong Kong, kind of, as they're suffering from its deadliest fire in nearly 80 years. The fire tore through Wang Phuc Court housing estate, killing more than 150 people and leaving dozens missing. Public outrage is exploding over this. We're talking petitions, demands, and a level of anger the city hasn't seen since the protest years. Now, people, they want answers, and they want them with subpoena power attached. Chief Executive John Lee announced a judge-led committee to investigate systemic failures, promising full transparency, but he avoided forming a commission of inquiry, which actually has the power to compel testimony under oath. Now, which is a little like saying, we want the truth, but we don't want it legally binding. Now, investigators have already found serious issues. Contractors allegedly used cheap netting that accelerated the fire. They reportedly dodged government testing, and regulators had issued repeated written warnings, the bureaucratic equivalent of shouting into the void, if you will. Now, more than a dozen people have been arrested for suspected manslaughter and corruption, but the public is now asking a much bigger question. How did every warning sign get completely ignored? Well, this fire has become a stress test for Hong Kong's governance, transparency, and credibility, and the whole situation now hinges on whether the investigation exposes the full truth or carefully avoids it. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, this fire in Hong Kong killed more than 150 people, and it happened after years of warnings about unsafe renovation materials. When a disaster comes from ignored safety alerts, what does that reveal about how modern cities, especially Hong Kong, handle risk and accountability? Because this seems like a pretty big blind eye to turn right here.
Yeah, it sure is. And I want to add one more detail as well to the unsafe materials, because I noticed it when we were in Hong Kong setting up the studio just back in August, where there was a McDonald's near where we were staying. And then it just disappeared. And I said, where, what? I was sure there was like golden arches right there. And what had happened was they had put up the scaffolding, which they use bamboo. They use not metal. They use actual bamboo, and it went up in the morning.
Uh-oh.
And so the McDonald's sign was just hidden behind the bamboo. So I figured it out. But I was like, how did they put that up within like a couple of
Yeah.
hours? And I remember thinking right away then, this bamboo thing, like, how are they still using bamboo? Now, what I think is going
Yeah.
on, what I think is going, and that's what it was. It was the whole building, that whole skyscraper was just bamboo scaffolding all around it. And so, what I think is going on is Hong Kong was run for years by tycoons. The tycoons were the people who ran the whole place. And China dealt bilaterally with the tycoons. The tycoons were mostly construction people, so that was part of being a tycoon was you have some construction arm to you and all that stuff. So the
Hmm.
tycoons were really the people running the country, the billionaires and centimillionaires of Hong Kong, the evergreens, the large financialized, also building condos and stuff like that. So what happened
Hmm.
was when the integration of China and Hong Kong really started to take shape, which is around a lot of our troubles with Bitcoin. So, with Bitcoin and regulators, FATF, so the Financial
Hmm.
Action Task Force, the guys who set up the money laundering $10,000 thing that you sign when you go into different countries and you've always got to declare and all that. Do you have cash on you?
Right.
$10,000. That comes from FATF, and then they control FinCEN and all that. In 2019, FATF, the presidency of FATF rotated into China. The Hong Kong protests in 2019 were the result of a FATF report that said because there isn't extradition for money laundering to mainland China, Hong Kong is a money laundering place. This sparked the true dialogue of what was going on in 2019, which was do
Hmm.
Chinese laws apply to Hong Kong? It was a way to take control of Hong Kong using Chinese laws, but it was the same enemies we have in Bitcoin. It was the FATF, it was the money laundering, the spying on the money folks. And so in the end, they
Hmm.
said, sure, no, we can do this. So everything you heard about the Chinese law applying to Hong Kong that spurred the entire 2019 fight was about FATF and the same enemies of Bitcoin. But really, under the surface, it was how much did the tycoons fall under the sway of the Chinese government? Now we know a big one, Jimmy Lai. Jimmy Lai, his last day in office, he was a major billionaire. He had something called Apple News. He was one of the big supporters of the protesters in 2019. His last day was when they arrested him, and he's still getting sentenced now. They're trying to get him out of jail. But his last day, he printed on, and this is summer of 2019, the last day of the newspaper was just the Bitcoin logo. And that's it. That was the
Oh.
last edition of the paper. And he was arrested, and we haven't heard from him since. He's been in jail. He got sentenced recently, or he's about to get sentenced. So the tycoons are the ones that are continuing to be the subject matter of how much, like the normal people are already screwed, right? They just get sent to China.
Mm.
But how much do the tycoons fall under the Chinese rules? This would be a pretty tight case for one of these instances, right? Do the tycoons, the people who build all this stuff in Hong Kong, face justice in China? If not, it's going to be a major problem because China, the whole point
Yeah.
of China assuming control was really assuming control of the tycoons. Now, it affects everybody, but will they actually go after the tycoons here or not? I think they will. The type of corruption you have in China is not like it is in America. Money can't just buy you out of your troubles in China. These
Hmm.
types of public security issues are going to be a big issue. So Hong Kong is going to be, they're going to let them try and solve it on their own. But the patience that mainland China has now for the tycoons, the wealthy people of Hong Kong, is down to nothing. And so I do believe if they
Mm.
can't come up with a clean solution, China will walk in and ruin their lives. They'll do it. They've done it before. Jimmy Lai is in a prison cell dying right now, and he's a billionaire. So they don't care. They'll go ahead and
Yeah.
do that.
That's super interesting because like the Hong Kong government has seemingly chose a simple committee instead of what they were calling a full commission of inquiry with subpoena power. So my question, like Nolan, is like, what does that decision tell you about how much truth they really want exposed out there? Are you sure they're still not, protecting those tycoons, as you say, or is
No,
justice really
that's
going
what I
to come
mean.
to pass this time?
But that's what I mean. Hong Kong gets to
Yeah,
pretend it can dish out justice, and when they
got it.
fail, China comes in. So I believe that's what you're seeing.
Got
You're
it.
seeing Hong Kong fall back on its old discretion, which it doesn't really have. And it was one thing with Jimmy Lai, who was organizing dissidents and organizing this stuff. But if it creates, like you said, it's creating a 2019 type insurgency amongst the population. The Chinese government, that's the last thing they want. They will sacrifice any billionaire to avoid that. So they're going to let them try and solve it. But their timeline for when China takes over the Hong Kong systems on almost any file is very short. And if you look at what's even going on in Hong Kong now, China is even taking over a lot of these construction type projects. Major construction has been funneled, funded, and fueled by the Chinese for a little while now. It's something that I noticed that surprised me about Hong Kong on my recent visits is that they do look like they're building a ton of stuff, and it looks like it's being Chinese finance, China finance, not Hong Kong finance. They're going around the tycoons, which I don't think they like. You can already see Shenzhen and the
Yeah.
Chinese side is way more modern, and Hong Kong is really starting to continue to look like an old kind of city. And you can see the Chinese they're gonna let the tycoons do their thing, but if they fail in any way, they will come in and deal with it because they don't care about billionaires the way America might.
Yeah, this is super interesting and complex. And like part of me wonders, is this tragedy maybe a symbol of kind of Hong Kong's unique governance problems that you speak of? Or like, does it reflect maybe a larger global trend where, rapid development outpaces the ability to enforce safety and transparency? Because this seems like a bit of a problem.
Hong Kong has always been that. Hong Kong has always been a kind of
Has
Wild
it?
West. It's a Wild West situation for China. China has always thought of it as a total Wild West spot. It was always a kind of tax-free situation. And if you go back to, I'm a big fan of these, the Shogun movie that came out or the TV show that came out last year,
Yeah.
Shogun. It was on FX. It was great, right? So the
Yeah.
sequel to Shogun, I don't know why they're not doing it on television, but the sequel to it is actually the beginning of Hong Kong. So there was a small transaction. Remember the transaction when the pilot talks the Shogun into investing in Macau, and there's some Ronin down there. He says there's some Ronin down there, and they've
Yeah.
been working. So that transaction gets followed up in the next one. 100 and something years later, they go to the beginning of Hong Kong and how that all started, and then you just follow the story to Hong Kong. It goes back to Japan after, but the next iteration, the consequence of that investment is the second story called Taipan. A taipan is like a commercial warlord, like a title that existed in Hong Kong because it was always
Okay.
mercantile. The whole area, Canton, Guangzhou, that whole area is not the same as Mandarin China. They always had a problem with the bureaucratic state. They were much more capitalistic, whatever we'd think of capitalistic from that era. So Hong Kong, and what we think of as America, as Chinese American, all the people, all the Chinese that came over to work on the railroad and all those people, those were Cantonese, not Mandarin. They all came from Hong Kong through
Oh,
Hong
okay.
Kong. They all came from that part of the world. When you think of American Chinese food, you're hearing about Cantonese food, not Mandarin. It's almost a different country. It's a different language. They can't talk to each other. It's a completely different language. So the whole Hong Kong area was this highly capitalistic, highly entrepreneurial, very different quality than the rest of China. And what we saw from that book, Taipan, for example, is they never really anticipated, they could never really gauge the type of growth because people came immediately and were building ramshackle things from day one, from the moment the island of Hong Kong became British territory. Because remember, the rest of it, the new territories, Kowloon, they leased that from China. But the actual island, they never had to give that back. That was pure 100% crown land. And in fact, when it was taken, the Chinese government laughed at the people who took it. They didn't understand. They didn't build big boats. So they didn't understand that the Hong Kong Bay was one of the great natural harbors of the world, like Manhattan. Like you could build a fleet of boats. You could have a whole huge maritime shipping conglomerate that could run out of there. And so when they built it, immediately all of the dissidents from China moved to Hong Kong because the Chinese imperial arm couldn't reach them. That's why everything we heard about the money laundering thing about FATF goes to the heart of Hong Kong. The point of Hong Kong was the triads. The triads that got into the drugs, those people were really dissidents against the empire. They were really protesting the empire. So they all moved to Hong Kong. And nothing was done correctly. You can even there's a final book in the series which goes to the 1960s. They made a TV show about it called The Noble House, which starred Pierce Brosnan, and just before he was cast as James Bond. And it's all about stock market manipulation. And again, it's another story about just how shoddy construction always was there, how it was always kind of a makeshift refugee camp in many ways, people leaving China, people moving in. So what it says, I think, is what it's always been. China has always had this Wild West that is Hong Kong. It is kind of the Wild West for them. It's the same way the Wild West was the Wild West for America. And it's why you even call them cowboy traders. That's what we call people from Hong Kong who trade in the high risk environment of Hong Kong markets. We call them cowboy traders for that reason, because it's been a Wild West for a long time. So you can always expect it to be a little bit like this. It's not the same as Japan or mainland China, or it's the opposite of Singapore. It's a completely different planet when it comes to those things. So I think it's in line with what the city has always been.
Okay, well, that's good to hear at least. And I want to move on now because we got to go to our next story here, Nolan. It's one of my favorite places in the entire world. And of course, we are talking about Costco, as they are suing the Trump administration over its tariffs, not to attack the tariffs themselves, but, to make sure they get their money back if the Supreme Court strikes them down. So here's what's actually happening. Dozens of companies have filed lawsuits in the U.S. trade court over the last month, all trying to secure eligibility for refunds if Trump's global tariffs are ruled as being unlawful. Now, the Supreme Court heard arguments last month, and while the justices seemed skeptical of Trump's use of emergency powers, they didn't give a timeline for a decision, so companies aren't exactly waiting. They're filing now to avoid being left out if refunds eventually flow. Costco, they jumped in, arguing that Customs and Border Protection denied its request to extend the deadline for finalizing tariff determinations, and that denial could jeopardize future refunds. Now, we don't know how much the tariffs have cost Costco so far, but considering how many of their non-food imports come from outside the U.S., the number is very likely not small. Costco, a company famous for selling 40 packs of muffins for $9, is basically saying, look, if these tariffs get overturned, we want the refund and we want the whole refund. And honestly, who can blame them? Businesses of all sizes are scrambling because the rules have shifted so many times this year that no one knows what the final invoice is actually supposed to look like. Meanwhile, the White House says that economic consequences of striking down tariffs would be enormous, which is usually what administrations say right before the courts tell them, we'll let you know. The stakes are very real here. Now, tariffs have raised costs for electronics, apparel, and plenty of everyday items. Retailers warn consumers could feel more pain if uncertainty were to drag on, and more lawsuits from major companies could pressure the administration ahead of the ruling. Now, what happens next comes down to the Supreme Court and whether the tariff ends with a refund stampede or a legal dead end. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, Costco isn't suing to block these tariffs. They're suing just to protect their rights to refunds if the Supreme Court strikes the tariffs down. What does that tell you about how unpredictable and unstable U.S. trade policy has become right now?
Well, I think it says more about how lawyers function. Costco has a bunch of in-house lawyers, and of course the lawyers say you better do it now. Lawyers are people you pay to worry for you. So I would anticipate this is exactly the type of advice. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I went to law school. I never rode a bar, but I know enough lawyers. I've planned enough bachelor parties along with lawyers to know it's no fun because they just worry about everything and they can't handle anything and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
you hire your lawyers to worry for you. So I think it's typical of lawyers. So I wouldn't go that far with it. Now, as far as the let's say capriciousness of U.S. trade policy when it comes to these things, of course, Trump has been using the tariff thing to negotiate, right? He's using it as a negotiating tool.
Hmm.
He's threatening, he's pulling it back. He's threatening, he's pulling it back. Ultimately, we do need to know if a president can do this. I always leaned on the side that he easily and obviously had these powers. Only when I started hearing the Supreme Court judges whisper, maybe not, did I ever start questioning it. Now, my understanding is there's still procedural things Trump could do, even if the Supreme Court shuts him down, and that he can invoke certain trade war measures. He can invoke certain instances where America is in a, the tool set of the president is opened up if you're in a type of war or emergency setting where things like tariffs become obviously easy to do and obviously within the powers of a president. So I think he'll keep trying to do some rope-a-dope, even if he does have the Supreme Court go against him. He'll keep trying to find ways to do it because it's part of negotiating for him right now. And, I think that's why he's trying to load up those tariffs as dividends for the people of America to make sure he's got the court of public opinion on his side. So I think he's got enough wiggle room no matter what that he'll be able to go after this. And it's the one he really wants. So, he's even said he would go to the Supreme Court to listen to these arguments and has made a clear case that this is obviously a presidential power. Again, I always believed there was no risk of this ever going the other way. I don't remember exactly what I heard the Supreme Court judges say when they were whispering maybe not, but it did seem like there is a way that this doesn't make sense or that it needs these other conditions. So, in my opinion, Trump is going to keep using them as much as he can in order to negotiate. And if the Supreme Court goes against him, he'll immediately push towards having whatever circumstances needed for him to go and pull the trigger on these, including the court of public opinion by negotiating openly with the American people to give them this money instead of Costco.
Yeah, no, the people love free money. So like you said, that is a great way to win the court of public opinion. But with that being said, the Supreme Court does seem a little skeptical of Trump using these emergency powers to impose these global tariffs. So my question for you, Nolan, is how do businesses operate when major economic policies might get reversed months later by the courts? That seems like a tough road to navigate.
Yeah, it definitely is. You need predictability in these markets, but that, more or less what's been going on all these years, predictably. So predictability works for a long time. And if the, let's say, predictability over 40, 50, 60 years leads you to something like the Triffin dilemma, right? We've heard about the Triffin dilemma in Bitcoin many times, which is that countries that have the world reserve asset, in this case the US dollar, are always going to find themselves in a type of economic war with other countries because there'll be other countries that want to manipulate that currency so that exports from their countries can be cheaper. So we've seen Japan manipulate the US currency for a long time. China has manipulated the currency for a long time. It's what's made Americans heavy consumers because of the economic relationships that have been there. So the predictability has been there for 80 years. And now the only companies that can continue to thrive in this environment are the ones that do the economic hedging, the ones that do really have commercialism and consumerism in mind. Now, I love Costco, but it's a consumer-based entity, right? It is 100%
Yeah.
focused on the consumption of the users. They're not making anything. And it's very clear Trump is trying to fight against the Triffin dilemma, which was the incentivization of the world becoming America's factory, the manipulation of markets and currency to make the rest of the world a factory for America, and to turn Americans into consumers. There's only so long that can go on for, and it looks like we're at the end of that road. If you look at the waistline of most of the people in Costco, right? That's 80 years of predictability. And I'm not trying to fat shame anyone, but it's true, right? You go there and the portions are enormous. And I love
Yeah.
Costco, don't get me wrong. But America is going to have to fundamentally change one way or the other. One way or the other. It's not a president who gets to decide this. Eventually, the music is going to stop, and Americans won't be subsidized consumers anymore. It won't make sense for China to continue to subsidize American consumption. It could even reverse. It could even turn into a situation where America has to become the factory for wealthy Chinese people. So in this case, you've got predictability that's been going on for so long. It's suited winners like Costco. I definitely don't want to see Costco in any financial hardship or trouble, but the truth is the consumer of Costco is going to have to change, and how they get the money to consume, all those things are changing. So we're at a point where the whole economy in America is changing, and it won't be a presidential thing that can really choose one way or the other. You might get someone who comes in and says, we're not going to do these things. They're not going to get two mandates of acting like it's 2010 again. That era and that world is gone. And so no
Yeah.
matter what, you're inevitably going to come to this. I mean, a lot of the border stuff and tariff stuff we saw Biden keep going with anyway. I know Biden liked a lot of the early tariffs that Trump left him. Some of the economic border stuff that happened was, with I think one of them with some drugs, with some pharmaceuticals. I think Biden just went with what Trump was doing. So, and those, Trump did a lot of good things in the last mandate too, just like Obama did some in his time, and Biden did some in his time. Things you'd want to keep going with. And so what we saw is you could go along with this stuff for a long time, but the Triffin dilemma, financial manipulation, financial engineering means that Americans are going to have to change. Costco is not going to be a preferred company, a preferred beneficiary of the system the way it was, because again, a straight relationship between issuing credit cards and super-sized things to consume was perfect for the America that alone ran the world financially. In this new system where we're trying to onshore more manufacturing, they can't be the Costco that we've always known, or they can, but they're going to have to deal with different circumstances at the border and where they source their stuff from, and they're going to have to alter their business model a little bit, it looks like, one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, Costco has actually changed their business model quite a bit. I don't know if you know this, and you probably did because you know everything. Costco began as a place for people who were going off to war to leave their stuff. It was essentially like a storage locker, and then they started adding products so that guys could buy them before they went out to war and stuff, like going into ships. I think it started in San Diego or something. So
Oh, was that so? I didn't
they've
know
been
any
able
of
to
that.
pivot before.
I didn't know
Yes,
that.
I got
So
something
it was
you
like
don't know.
it was like an
Yes.
army surplus situation, like an army surplus.
Yes. It was originally you could just leave your stuff there, you go off to war, you could pick it back, and then they were like, oh, we should start selling stuff to these guys too. And that's how it slowly morphed into the wholesale store that we know over time.
Wow.
It's a really interesting, I listened to a podcast about its entire beginnings. It was a super interesting story. I definitely recommend it. All right, let's move on to this next story here, Nolan. This is an interesting one. As Starbucks workers are now striking, and the newly mayor-elect of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, and Senator Bernie Sanders are literally on the sidewalk with them, turning a Brooklyn picket line into the most political coffee break in America. Now, Mamdani didn't just show up, he amplified the fight online. You see, on X, he pointed out that Starbucks CEO made around $95 million last year while workers are striking for the bare minimum. Sanders echoed that theme, calling out the gap between corporate success and worker reality. And this is while current Mayor Eric Adams announced a $39 million settlement for workers. New York City found Starbucks violated fair scheduling laws more than 500 million times. And now it's not only New York. More than 100 stores nationwide are striking, demanding better wages, more staffing, and hours that don't resemble a roulette wheel with health insurance. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, Starbucks workers are striking across more than 100 stores, and now political leaders like Mamdani and Bernie Sanders are physically joining them. What does it say about the current moment when labor movements are becoming mainstream political events again?
Well, again, going back to the consumer argument, one of the things that I think of when I think of Starbucks is the ownership model, right? It's not like McDonald's. McDonald's is a real estate holding company that other people
Right.
buy the brand to sell stuff, but they own the franchises. Starbucks never took that model. They're 100% corporate owned. So they're like one of these private equity shareholders things. They're all the franchises. They're not really franchises in the way that McDonald's is a franchise. They're corporate outlets, let's call it, right? So you can understand why, and we're seeing, I think, Mike's. There's like a sub company that went viral over the weekend that just got picked up, Mike's Subs or something like that, where one
Oh,
guy
yeah.
had done
I know.
one guy had bought a thing just before the private equity had come in and bought it up. So they bought it up last year, and he did a video with what the sandwich looked like just 1 year ago versus what it looks like now.
Oh, geez.
And it's hilarious. Like it went totally viral this weekend. I thought it was hilarious. And so it makes sense because coffee shops are headed to that world with the tipping now. Ever since COVID and the reduction in alcohol, for example, I became like the biggest coffee shop tipper during 2020 in New York City because I was like, thanks for coming to work, guys. Like this was the worst part about
Yeah.
lockdowns, not being able to get an espresso. And I'll pay you double just for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I became, and if you noticed, ever since the coffee shop people, like the human capital went way up. They're starting to
Right.
attract like bartenders who used to be able to make $500 a shift at a bar. That's drying up, and people don't party like they used to. And a lot of that skill
Wow.
and quality is coming to the coffee world, which I love because I love a good cup of coffee and I love a barista who knows what they're doing and pays attention. And so, indeed, when you look at Starbucks now, you're really starting to see the difference in staff. Before COVID, most baristas were like McDonald's workers, and I didn't really care. It didn't really register the quality. Now it's really obvious. I even know which Starbucks have good
Interesting.
baristas versus not good baristas. I don't go to Starbucks very much, but I have a plenty of good coffee shops
Yeah.
around me. So I think this has everything to do with changing consumption habits, especially in a place like New York, where, indeed, we're not going to be the same kind of mass consumers we were. We're being even more choosy about things like coffee, and it's a little more expensive. But there's a reason why you'd want a better barista. So I think it fits in with what's going on in New York. You're not going to see this kind of thing happen in a small coffee shop, and New York is filled with delicious and amazing small coffee shops. I would imagine Mom Donnie's got a winner here because there's a lot of people who work at these coffee shops. And I know they've been trying to unionize for a while and they usually just shut down, right? Like I think they just leave if you try and
Right.
unionize at a Starbucks. They just say, we're out of here. So I think it makes sense for New York City. I think this should play well. I think you can tell the folks in New York know the difference between a good barista and a not good barista. And consumption habits are changing and we're seeing, a bigger value put on baristas. I personally think that way and I've changed how I tip baristas. I tip them every time now.
Hmm.
I never would have tipped at a coffee shop before. Never. That would never happened.
Yeah.
Uh, but we're seeing a
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, it's actually kind of nice to see a little bit more value placed on like humans, right? And I actually kind of started noticing that too when I started seeing my baristas being more like flair baristas. I'm like, when did they start doing this at my local coffee shop? Like I've seen that at the bar down the street, but not there.
Yeah.
And this whole thing with Mamdani and Bernie Sanders is obviously tackling a much bigger issue here. As Mamdani called out the CEO for making around $95 million last year when these workers are just fighting for the basics. So my question is, Nolan, what does this widening gap between corporate pay and worker conditions tell you about the broader shift happening in the economy right now? Because these C-suite executive pay things are just getting out of control.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're going to keep seeing this stuff. It's the financial engineering on top of the hard work, and that gap between rich and poor is, you can't erase the gap between rich and poor, right? And it is kind of a red herring, right? The gap between rich and the poor. But when it gets like this, when it gets to the point where a guy running a coffee shop, which is like, if you are truly, this is not exactly like a wartime CEO situation. He's dealing with coffee. The worst day he had in the past year was when RFK came and yelled at him with his, rough voice, telling him he needs less seed oils and stuff. Yeah, yeah. It's like that's the worst day he had. Like that was literally the worst day at Starbucks in a whole year was getting yelled at by RFK
Yeah.
about seed oils and garbage. And so, Starbucks doesn't really need this kind of CEO. Like, they're not pulling a rabbit out of a hat here. This is not Steve Jobs coming back to Apple. This is this is like cups of
Hmm.
coffee. I can pour a cup of coffee. So
Right.
it makes entire sense that we would get to that point. And I guess that's what I'm getting to about scale and the size of a coffee shop and what you're actually paying for in the end. Do I need to pay for this guy's 95 $1 million yearly pay, or do I just want a cup of coffee, and do I want the person behind the counter to be able to live in the city they live in and have an easy commute to give me the cup of coffee? And so you're starting to hear people make those calculations and starting to have people do that. So that's why I think Mamdani has a winner. I want all my baristas. I don't want to maximize the profit of CEO to get my coffee. That I don't care. Like I would
Right.
prefer having an owner run small coffee shop that knows what they're doing. And I think most Americans are arriving at that point. But there's no justification. Now, people can make money. I don't want to stop anyone from making money. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say here. But indeed, you can understand why people would be so upset. I mean, this is not a vital cog in the wheel, this CEO. This CEO has done more nuisance to my life and to the barista's life. I mean, when he said anyone can go pee in Starbucks, and now because anyone can go and use the washroom, we can't even leave the milk out. So now I have to add this whole elaborate explanation when I order a coffee about how much
Right.
milk I want and how much you should leave. How, like, give me a break. Just give me the cup. I can drink it. I can pour it out. I can add the milk and all that stuff. They've ruined the Starbucks experience. Now they went back on it. I see the coffee, the milk
Right.
is back, but now the homeless people aren't allowed. But who do you think had to police that the whole time? Who do you think? It was the
Right.
barista after a hard shift. You go in the bathroom and it's filthy. You think they like that rule?
Ugh,
They definitely didn't like that rule, right? They've got to be the ones now to kick them
no.
out all the time. It's too much. So that's not what you want for your
Yeah.
local coffee shop, and you don't want to see it anywhere at McDonald's or anything, but especially not a Starbucks because people are in and out. You don't need people there for hours. And again, what a tough life it must have been for those baristas in those washrooms all that time. It just made no sense.
Yeah.
So I got plenty of problems with the C-suite over at Starbucks. So I say, Mamdani, go get them. Go get them.
Yeah, yeah. Eat the rich. I'm here for
Eat
it.
the
Let's eat them.
rich.
All right, we
Eat
got
the rich.
we got one more story here. No, let's eat them up. All right, next one here we got is Vanguard is finally cracking open the crypto gates, and yes, this is the same Vanguard that used to treat Bitcoin ETFs like they were radioactive waste. And now 50 million of the most conservative investors on Earth are about to get a buy BTC button next to their retirement index funds. Now, this is one of the biggest about faces in traditional finance that we've seen in years, and it's coming from a firm that once called Bitcoin speculative, irresponsible, and basically not in the spirit of John Bogle. So here's what's actually happening. Vanguard will now allow brokerage clients to trade Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, and Solana ETFs starting today, putting the digital assets in the same category as gold. Now, this comes after years of insisting that crypto is too volatile, too immature, and too chaotic for the firm's famously risk-averse client base. And yet the demand seemingly never went away. Retail wanted in, institutions wanted in, and Vanguard's new CEO, Salim Ramji, formerly of BlackRock, aka the crypto ETF Death Star, clearly decided that pretending crypto didn't exist was a worse risk. So now, Vanguard, the firm with over $11 trillion under management, my thing keeps him here. Trillion under management is now acquiescing, and we are going to see those services available on their platform. So we're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, Vanguard spent years refusing to touch crypto ETFs, calling Bitcoin too risky, and now they're giving 50 million clients access. What does this sudden shift tell you about how traditional finance views Bitcoin today versus only 5 years ago? Seems like a pretty big shift.
Yeah, capitulation. And it's just so juicy and delicious all over the story. You get BlackRock this week announcing that their number one moneymaker, like in fees and everything, is the Bitcoin ETF, right? So they've decided they didn't want any of that revenue. The number one revenue generator for BlackRock, that was too stupid. So now they don't get any first mover advantage or nothing. So that's great. But they get the captive audience. But at the same time that we're also seeing the duration mismatch and national bonds, the so-called safe haven asset, go completely outside of the realm of rationality and logic. We saw what's happening in Japan, the 10-year busting up. America can't control. They lower interest rates. The 10-year goes right up. So we're seeing the psychology of what was safe, government bonds, become anything but safe. It's starting to look more and more dangerous and more risky. And while you've got that scenario of government bonds and state and sovereign issued debt and collateral being seen as this risky thing to hold now, literally risky to hold government bonds because of the lies implicit in the coupon and the redemption rate. And so when you think of it that way, and then BlackRock saying that about Bitcoin, and then all of these announcements about Bitcoin as collateral through MicroStrategy and everybody else, and when you see what happened to Vanguard in this scenario, they really look slow, stupid, out of the loop, and that they have the world backwards, which is kind of perfect, right? If we're going to change the world in Bitcoin, seeing some incumbent as completely backwards is necessary. Not everyone can get it right. And we've seen, I saw today Goldman Sachs bought some huge ETF fund. They paid about $2 billion just to get the order flow and the customer base from that fund. And so you're seeing these people valued more and more, the people who use these products and invest in these products valued by the platforms more and more. And Vanguard looks the way you'd want them to look if you were interested in the Bitcoinization of the economy. They look slow, they look stupid, they look way outside of the realm. And for them to bend the knee and capitulate this week is kind of a chef's kiss. It's kind of perfect. So you love seeing it. You love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, this means millions of everyday conservative investors like my Gam can buy Bitcoin with the same button that they use for index funds. So, big picture, Nolan, how big of a moment is this for Bitcoin in terms of adoption and long-term cultural acceptance? Do you think this is going to be a big needle mover, maybe at least over time, if not immediately?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, because the simple equation here is this: what is these? That's what ultimately what Bitcoin wanted as a network, as an entity, as people, as peers in the network. Ultimately, what you want is for Bitcoin to be a risk-off asset that is just a no-brainer, low IQ way to save money. And you don't want your your Gam to sit around saying, "What's the newest stock? What's the newest trend?" You don't want them doing that. You want them to be like, the idea of a government bond was a great idea. Awesome, right? Invest, you get a guaranteed rate of return. Wonderful. If they would not have screwed up everything else on Wall Street, then that would have been a way to continue for another generation easily. So you want the game to be low IQ. You want there to be very simple products that people like Vanguard can offer. You don't want everything to be a MicroStrategy, STRK scheme to get people to do this and that. You want things to be a lot simpler. And so when they can offer this ETF and it's no custody risk for them anyway, and you realize that there is just this very simple, some people will call it vanilla product available. That's what these folks want. And to have it sitting there like this, I think is a great signal, and indeed good for Vanguard, because Vanguard is going to have a lot of trouble selling government bonds. Trump is going to continue to manipulate the interest rate, and it's not going to be to make people who buy government bonds richer. He's got his guaranteed buyer in Tether and other stablecoin issuers, and that's all he needs. He wants the foreigners to basically supply and fund Tether and others to buy the bonds in order to weaponize the dollar to go into foreign countries like Argentina and Canada and others and shut down their fiat Ponzi and redistribute the purchasing volume of US government debt into decentralized ways. That's not for your gam. That's not for your granny anymore, right? So
I know it's not.
Your granny needs something. She doesn't need a weaponized US dollar that's going to wipe out the other fiat Ponzi's in other countries by redistributing the duration mismatch in favor of Tether versus the decentralized holders of Argentina. She doesn't need to be in that trade. So the way to get her out of that trade is, Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's interesting about this specifically is while Vanguard seems to be acquiescing to allowing access to these ETFs, they still aren't launching their own Bitcoin ETF. They're only allowing others. So my question, Owen, is what does that internal conflict reveal to you about how old world financial institutions are wrestling with Bitcoin's rise? Because it doesn't seem like a full send. It seems like a, fine, you wanted it, here it is kind of a situation.
Yeah, well, you remember that thing we saw last week with JP Morgan and Strategy when they weren't delivering the actual stock? Well, in any ETF, there's something called creation and redemption. They actually have to go and do the buying and the selling for you, right? Now, they can lie about it.
You're right.
They can lie. They can say, "Hey, we bought it," because you have it on your balance sheet, and then that's that, right? So creation redemption, with the old world, they could take care of it all in a couple days and do a big batch buy, and they could just create and redeem without it really reconciling on paper. Bitcoin doesn't allow you to do that. Bitcoin forces you to actually have the stock. That's why everyone uses the Coinbase custodian, because it's easy for them all to do the creation and redemption at that one spot. What this means is they still don't
Right.
understand, because if you get held without Bitcoin and the price goes one way or the other, that could wipe Vanguard out. So if you respect Bitcoin and
Yeah.
understand what you're dealing with, you need to physically have it. You need to know it's yours. And for them to not acknowledge the creation, which is the whole magic of ETFs, is creation and redemption. Buying the Bitcoin, selling the Bitcoin, buying the Bitcoin, selling the Bitcoin. So if they don't have a facility to do that and they're buying someone else's paper Bitcoin, it's existentially dangerous for them. That's why BlackRock and the others have very great relationships with Coinbase. That's why they all kind of deal with Coinbase, because Coinbase is they have the Bitcoin. That's why Zoppo sold them the institutional custodian business that used to be Zoppo.
Oh.
Zoppo Bank didn't need it. They sold it to Coinbase, and because it was the best, designed specifically eventually for this creation redemption part of the equation. That's why Coinbase has the entirety of the market. Now, it isn't a big problem for Vanguard to solve. They got to get on the phone with Brian Armstrong. They got to say, we need this much facility. We need a guy every day, or a girl, or an agent. We need to be able to deal with someone at an OTC desk to buy in huge amounts. So that they're not doing this is a sign that they don't know what they're doing. And the timing of it is kind of hilarious, because we could have a crazy Bitcoin move within the next couple of months. And if that
Yeah.
does happen and they didn't do the real creation redemption, I'm sorry, but your Graham is going to learn a hard lesson at the expense of Citadel or Vanguard. And
Not my
could
gam
be
gam.
interesting. Not your Gam. Yeah.
Oh, oh man, that could be interesting. Well, it's always interesting, Nolan, having you on the show. We certainly love and appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us here on the Blockchain Report. So thank you so much for your time today. And I know, of course, you have your own show, so tell people where they can find it. They got to check it out, The Great Awakening. Let them know.
Indeed, everyone, come around 9 a.m. Eastern to 11 a.m. Eastern, right before Hank. We do the Great Awakening, and we cover all kinds of stuff. Today, we covered the Venezuela boats. We covered more of the David Sachs New York Times hit piece, a little bit of the Tim Waltz story out of Minnesota and what's going on with the corruption over there. Basically, the upshot of today's show is that narratives and the legacy media just aren't catching very quickly. They get debunked within a couple of hours now. Pretty interesting amount of media literacy going on out there in the environment. And you love to see it. So, upgrade in
Yeah.
American media literacy underway.
Yeah, well, it's always an upgrade having you here on the show here. You always make it really fun and interesting and educational. I learned so much from you, Nolan, so I certainly appreciate it. And you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
See you tomorrow, right?
See you tomorrow. We'll be there.
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Yeah, same. But hey, that's why Ledn exists. They're the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans. We're talking over $9 billion issued since 2018 with a perfect record protecting client assets. Now you might be asking, Hank, what makes a Ledn loan different? Well, you see, with custody loans, your collateral, it stays put. They don't go degen and lend it out for yield. There are no credit checks. It funds in under 6 hours. No monthly payments. You can repay anytime with zero penalties. And for transparency that grown-ups actually want, proof of reserves reports every 6 months verified by a top accounting firm. The bottom line here, gang, is Ledn lets Bitcoin holders unlock liquidity without selling. And you can check them out at ledn.io/RoxomTV. That's ledn.io/RoxomTV. All right, welcome back to this morning's Bull Run, gang. And joining us for the second half of today's Bull Run, our guest is someone who's working on one of the most quietly transformative parts of Bitcoin, the stuff that doesn't get the headlines, but actually determines whether people keep their coins or lose them forever. So if you care about self-custody, inheritance, or Bitcoin security that doesn't require a PhD in engineering, this is the guy building the tools the rest of us are eventually going to rely on. So let's give a big blockchain report. Welcome to the product manager at Liana, Manuel Gotti, everybody. Manuel, welcome to the show. So excited to have you on today. How are you doing on this Tuesday?
Introduction. I'm very good, and you?
Oh, I'm doing great, Manuel. Before we get into today's news, really quick, 30 seconds. Give me the short and skinny. Who are you? What's Liana about? What are you and the team building over there? We'd love to know.
Okay, I'm Manuel Gatti. I'm from Italy, so sorry for my English. We are building Liana. Liana is custody solution. So we are trying to solve the issue of custodying your Bitcoin. So as you may know, you can have a trustful solution with a custodian or an exchange, or you can have a do-it-yourself, risky in some way of custodying your Bitcoin. We try to solve the issue by keeping the trustlessness, but having more security into your custody solution with recovery options that you can use in case something fails and you lose your keys or something like that. So in order to have peace of mind with keeping your Bitcoin, you can use Liana, let's say.
That sounds great. If there's one thing I'm always in favor of, it's ways to keep my Bitcoin even more safe. I protect it like a bird protecting its eggs. So we appreciate what you're doing over there. And we're going to talk more about that in just a bit. But right now, I want to get into some of today's top news stories. I'm going to read it, and then you and I are going to chat about it. Sound good?
Yeah, good.
All right, great. So hang 10, I'll call for you in just a second. But first, China has quietly issued the first batch of new rare earth exports licenses, and the global auto industry is basically exhaling like someone finally cracked a window in a room full of battery engineers. Now, this move fulfills a key promise from the Trump Z summit, the diplomatic equivalent of fine, we'll ship your magnets if you stop yelling. So here's what happened. Back in April, China slapped strict export controls on rare earth materials, forcing companies to apply for approval on every single shipment. Now, this slowed supply chains down to a crawl, stalled sections of the auto industry, and reminded Washington that China controls the minerals powering everything, from EV motors to missile guidance systems. Now, it wasn't just leverage, it was a pressure point Beijing pressed with two fingers. Now, China is issuing the new general licenses, which let certain customers receive year-long export permissions instead of filing paperwork every time they need a truckload of strategic dirt. Now, Reuters says 3 major firms, JL Mag Rare Earth, Ningbo Yongsheng, and Beijing Zhangkesan Huan High Tech received these new licenses for many of their clients. Now, all of them sell to the auto industry, which means, yes, car manufacturers are about to stop hyperventilating into paper bags. But here's the fun part. The White House framed these licenses as China essentially dismantling its export controls. China, meanwhile, has publicly said, well, very little, which is a classic geopolitical move. Give the other side enough optimism to relax and keep enough ambiguity to stay in control. And nothing here is guaranteed long term. Now, these general licenses only apply to big Chinese firms. Criteria for these may widen, or China may quietly keep certain customers, especially defense, aerospace, or semiconductors, on the nope, try again later list. European companies are already complaining about delays, opacity, and the fact that the only transparent thing in this process is their growing frustration. Right now, the world is treating this like a breakthrough, but the real test will be whether China is truly easing up or simply handing out longer leashes while keeping the collar firmly in place. And the whole situation now hinges on how broadly Beijing expands these licenses beyond this carefully controlled first batch. We're bringing Manuel back. Manuel, when you see China tightening or loosening control over rare earth exports, do you view this as purely geopolitical, or does it signal something deeper about global supply chain centralization that Bitcoin tries to avoid?
I guess it's kind of both. Let's say I see these geopolitical moves in order to take leverage on specific scarce resources, and I'm a little bit afraid about the fact that a government can control this kind of dynamics and influence the price in such a way. But at the same time, of course, it's something also that it's very telling about what's happening in the world. We see a polarization of the world in all aspects, and this is very, I don't know. This is not something I would like to see in the long term, let's say. But yeah, that's the way it is. I see it more as a geopolitical move, but also concerning in terms of polarization and deglobalization, let's say.
Yeah. And the rare earth minerals, they seem to power everything, right? EVs, defense systems, and pretty much every modern device. So my question for you, Manuel, is how important is it for Bitcoin infrastructure, especially wallets and hardware, to diversify away from single country dependencies?
Yeah, that's very important in general to diversify from single countries, but also single manufacturer dependencies. Because of course, in Bitcoin, you don't have the possibility to, let's say, recover your password as you have for banking or this kind of stuff. So if you just rely on one hardware that is relying itself on one single country, on one single manufacturer, this can be like prone to supply chain attacks or this kind of attack. So what we try to suggest is to diversify also regarding the manufacturers and the government dependency on your hardware devices in your setups, and you can do it by using multiple hardwares in the so-called multi-sig setups. And you can even have different recovery options in Liana, as we maybe will talk about later on. So yeah, I think that's very, very important and one of the security aspects in Bitcoin custody.
Yeah, and I'm really glad we have you for this next question, Manuel, because from a risk management perspective, how do you think Bitcoiners should be thinking about geopolitics affecting the hardware that we ultimately depend on, like secure elements, chips, and signing devices? How should we be approaching that?
Yeah, I guess the best way to do that is to diversify, as we were saying, the hardwares. I know there are different ways of doing secure elements, different degrees of open source models versus closed source. My personal opinion and my personal suggestion is to diversify the manufacturers that have different techniques and different suppliers to produce their own device, and this should potentially be very good in terms of security practice. But you can also go beyond that and potentially, for example, if you are afraid that your manufacturer is compromising the entropy through which you are generating the seed phrases, so the seed words that you use to secure your Bitcoin, you could potentially generate it by yourself. This is it's more advanced, let's say, but this could potentially be another way of mitigating the issue if this is the risk you are adverse to. And yeah, I think these are the main quick workarounds that I would think of. So yeah, and using multi-sigs, of course, using for the vast amount, for the amounts that count, let's say. So for your savings, let's say, you should use multi-sig with different hardwares, so that you are not exposed to a single hardware and a single country.
Yeah, no, I think those all sound like very good plans for this. We're always trying to keep our Bitcoin safe and secure, and those sound like certainly good avenues to traverse down so that we can do such. And this next story we're talking about actually talks about cyber safety as well, so I'm excited to chat about with you. So hang 10 there, Manuel. We're going to talk about this in just a second, because India has quietly ordered every smartphone maker, Apple, Samsung, Xiaomi, everyone, to preload a government cyber safety app that users cannot delete. Now, some countries preload music apps. India preloads a permanent roommate. Now, the app is called Censorship, and the manufacturers have 90 days to install it on all new devices. Phones already in the supply chain must receive it through software updates, meaning that your phone may soon wake up one morning having acquired a new government hobby. Now, the official reasoning is that India is facing a surge in cybercrime, stolen phones, and spoofed device IDs. The app can block lost phones, disconnect fraudulent SIM cards, and help track devices across networks. And honestly, those features are genuinely pretty useful. The issue is everything else that comes with them. Users can't remove or disable the app. The government didn't publicly announce the order. It was delivered privately to manufacturers, little sketch, and privacy advocates say this essentially kills the idea of user consent, because nothing says your device, your choice like an app that responds no. Now, Apple is especially boxed in. Its internal policy forbids pre-installing non-Apple apps. Its brand is literally, we don't let governments do this. So complying would require the company to swallow its entire marketing department whole. Now, Android manufacturers have more flexibility, but still have to worry about the optics. If customers turn on their new phone and the first thing they see is a government app waving hello, that is a vibe. Now, the deeper concern is mission creep. Security tools tend to expand. Today, they track stolen phones. Tomorrow, they track whatever someone decides belongs under security. And now, the whole situation hinges on whether India can fight cybercrime without turning every device into a pocket-sized government portal. We're bringing Manuel back. Manuel, India is forcing every smartphone maker to preload a government cyber safety app that users can't delete. From a product and privacy standpoint, how dangerous is it when governments decide what security actually means?
This is pretty dangerous, both on a personal side and a professional side. Yeah. I wouldn't trust government to do a good job, even if they were in a good intention, let's say. But I'm not really sure that there is good faith there. Maybe it's some Overton window that is opening. But yeah, being more on a more objective side, let's say, not on a personal anecdotal side. This is not good practice. This is, as far as I understood, it's a closed source software, not really well audited and this kind of stuff, and we have we are witnessing all over the world data leak in all governments infrastructure. I'm in Italy, and it's mainly a daily thing in Italy. It's very inefficient due to all the economics incentives that we know when government builds something. So this is very dangerous, in my opinion. And even if we grant good faith, I think it's something that I wouldn't want to see on my phone, let's say.
Yeah, no, me either. It certainly seems like the beginning of a very slippery slope. And, Liana is built around minimizing trust and maximizing user control. So my question is, what goes through your mind when you see a government mandate that literally removes user consent?
Yeah, this is, as you said, the opposite of what we do. We are open source. We open source our code because we want everyone to verify what we code, because it's actually useful for us to understand whether there are bugs or security vulnerabilities, and because we don't have anything to hide, of course. And this is of course the opposite. We want to minimize trust by using open source code and by relying on the Bitcoin protocol to enforce specific policies, specific spending policies, while with the government app, Indian government app, which I really don't know what's going to do precisely, let's say. You basically have something without choice and without proper audit. So that's the opposite of the Bitcoin ethos. So I don't know. What can I say? It's very hard to comment on that other than saying negative stuff.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting situation, especially like if you remember Apple years ago got into a lot of hot water because they just threw a YouTube album on everybody's iTunes that no one asked for, and people were furious. So it's not a big surprise that this isn't exactly, people aren't totally thrilled about this. And Apple themselves are famous for refusing government requests like the one we're seeing here. So my question for you, Manuel, is, should companies fight back even at the risk of losing market access, or is this the inevitable future of digital devices?
Yeah, I think on the company side, it is more a matter of cost and benefit. I don't think there is a great ethos on privacy on Apple side. As an anecdote, I can tell you that we have on Liana a feature that lets you download a node automatically from Liana. So in case you want to be fully self-sovereign in running your node, but you don't have the competencies to do it, Liana lets you do it by just one click. So you click on Liana, download a Bitcoin node. A Bitcoin node is downloaded, especially in particular using Bitcoin Core on your computer, and they keep a pruned version of the node on your device. And of course, the macOS devices at some point tracked the Bitcoin binaries as virus. So basically, our users were impacted by this, and they could not use this option because macOS, like Apple, was banning the Bitcoin binaries from their computer, basically. So this is a personal anecdote, just to say that, in my opinion, Apple is not like some hero of privacy or something like this. They just do some cost-benefit analysis, and they probably see more disadvantages than advantages. I'm okay with companies doing their own interest. I'm not saying that they should do our own interest, but I also see that these big companies are protected from competition and from other stuff happening by government. So I don't think this is very fair competition, if I may say.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I hear you, and I won't be surprised by anything Apple does, especially if it puts that money in their pockets, because as the old saying goes, right? Like if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense, and if it does make dollars, it probably makes sense. So we'll see how that all ends up playing out. All right, we're moving on to our last story here. So hang 10, Manuel. I'll be back to you in a second. As Peter Schiff woke up this morning, saw Strategy built a $1.44 billion U.S. reserve, and said, yes, finally proof Michael Saylor is a con man. Now, Strategy, the most aggressive corporate buyer of Bitcoin, announced it has created a massive USD reserve to cover dividends and debt payments for its preferred shares. Now, this money comes from selling new stock, not to buy Bitcoin, but to ensure liquidity and stability. Saylor calls it the next step in the company's evolution. For years, he's argued Strategy is building a dual reserve model, Bitcoin for long-term appreciation and dollars for operational safety. To him, this is strategy, not surrender, and Peter Schiff does not see it that way. He immediately posted that this is the beginning of the end for Strategy and claimed the company was forced to sell stock just to pay its bills. He called the stock broken. He called the business model a fraud. And he called Saylor the biggest con man on Wall Street, which frankly is quite a charge in a place where the bar for conmanship is historically high. Now here's the reality. Strategy's balance sheet has always been unconventional. They hold Bitcoin, they lever against it, they issue more shares, and then they buy more Bitcoin. It's high conviction, high volatility model that terrifies traditional finance and electrifies Bitcoiners. We're bringing Manuel back. Manuel, when Peter Schiff says Saylor is finished because Strategy built a $1.44 billion USD reserve, do you think critics misunderstand the difference between operational liquidity and long-term conviction?
Yeah, I don't know. This is a very I don't know, interesting story, because I'm not really into all these financial shenanigans that these Bitcoin treasury, some of these three Bitcoin treasury companies are doing. But I don't think they were unprepared for this kind of scenario. We already had lots of, let's say, bear markets or I don't know, dips in the past, and I don't think they were unprepared for this. So I guess in this sense, Schiff's tweet or whatever it was a provocation, more than a real stuff. I think it was already something that Michael Saylor and Strategy was planning to do in case of necessity of liquidity. So I guess it's not a confusion; it's more like let's say provocation between the different parts. But I also share a little bit the. Maybe I'm going against some of you or your audience, but I share some of the let's say skepticism towards strategy. So for once, I partially agree with Schiffs, even if I guess that this is not exactly the case. That in this time Saylor has already failed, let's say.
Yeah, I think this is just maybe, part of one of their contingency plans if something had like this. Michael Saylor's a bright guy. You got to imagine he figured this was in the realm of possibility. So it's not too particular. I don't take it as anything more than like this was something that was potentially going to happen and they're prepared for it. And we both know Peter Schiff will take any opportunity to stay relevant and get on his soapbox and bash Bitcoin because it keeps him in the news cycle. So anything out of Peter Schiff's mouth these days, I don't really take too much of it. But what's interesting about this, and I think you'll be able to speak to this a little better than I, is that, if Bitcoin companies were to start using more hybrid models like this from what we're seeing from Strategy, what new tools or visibility features should wallets provide for auditability and long-term security going forward?
Yeah, I don't know. Speaking of wallets, talking about this is a bit, let's say, unrelated, because actually what you're doing when you buy these kind of shares or debt instruments is not using a wallet. So what I actually suggest is using a real wallet, not buying real Bitcoin and accumulating Bitcoin instead of relying on shares or debt of these kind of financial instruments that, in my opinion, are far more risky. And what wallets should build? They should build, in my opinion, a very better usability and user experience, so that people are not afraid of using wallets and self-custodying. This is one of the push towards this kind of financial instruments, in my opinion, and this is what we are actually trying to build in Liana. So maybe I will talk about it, but I think the usability is still not there for both individuals and companies and businesses. So and having these kind of financial institutions relying all on the same exchanges or custodians is very scary, because if this, as it has happened in the past, if they failed, I don't know if there is any insurance to that, let's say.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you about the usability. I feel like for Bitcoin to kind of take the next step in its evolution, I need to be able to transfer my Bitcoin the same way I can transfer a Venmo payment like that in 2 clicks, and we're just not quite there yet. And I think that intimidation that people feel when they're initially getting into the space is a big hurdle that we're still learning to climb, and we're excited that you and the team at Liana are working to find that new future that we're going to be eventually into with Bitcoin, as that's going to go a long way. And I would love to talk more about Liana and your background in our deep dive. So guys, let's roll the stinger and get into it. All right, Manuel. So before we get into Liana, really quick, I'd love to start with you. I always love to hear people in the industry, their kind of origin story. So how did you first wander into the world of Bitcoin, and what was that orange pill moment like for you? Did you see it and immediately it clicked, or was it like a lot of other people that I've spoken to where you saw it, didn't quite gel immediately. You did your research and then got into it. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so the first time I saw it, I didn't dig into it, so it was a pity. But I came late, relatively late. But I have a peculiar story compared to other people that I know in the space, because I didn't go into crypto in general and shitcoins and this kind of stuff. I was born as a Bitcoin maximalist, and I will die with it probably.
And Manuel, we talked a little bit about your background, how you got into the space. I'd love to kind of move a little bit and talk about Liana. So for people that aren't familiar, what's the simplest way to explain what Liana does and why it currently matters?
Okay, so basically Liana makes superpower to self-custody. So in general, when you want to custody your Bitcoin, you have two options. You either rely on a third party, so you trust a third party to keep the keys of your Bitcoin, or you use a setup in which you are in control of your keys. And the most common self-custody solution are the single sig or the multi-sig solution. So you basically have one key that can spend the Bitcoin, or you have multiple keys with a threshold. For example, you have 3 keys and you decide that you need 2 of the 3 keys in order to spend. The difficulty with that is that if you lose the keys that are able to spend your funds, you are screwed up and you cannot recover your funds in any way. What Liana does is adding a time layer, let's say. So you have the so-called time locks, in which you basically have the same setups with single sig or multi-sig. So you have your keys that can always spend your coins and can always move your funds. But in case your funds are inactive for a certain period of time, a recovery option activates. So basically you lose your key, you have a recovery option that tells, oh, there is another key that you still possess that can recover your funds so that you don't lose them, but you are still able to recover the disaster, let's say, happening. And this adds a new layer for self-custody, and in general also helps, let's say, reach a point in which you can have also third parties without needing to trust them from the beginning. So if you basically use a third party, instead of giving them all your keys that can spend, you just give them a recovery key. If you lose everything, the third party will be able to help you recover the funds. But while you use your keys correctly, the third party cannot move your funds. So basically, if the third party goes bankrupt, you, as it happened with many exchanges, you are still safe with your funds. So we are trying to find a sweet spot for which self-custody is still usable for most users, and maybe we are removing some fear around self-custody by having these recovery options.
That's great. I mean, I can speak for most Bitcoiners out there. They often see, their options is self-custody or death, not your keys, not your coin. And Liana seems to be creating this kind of third option that you spoke of, a self-custody that's actually survivable. So my question for you, Manuel, is why is inheritance and key recovery such an overlooked problem in the space right now?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I am the product manager, and I usually do user interviews, and I see a very weird phenomenon in which people seem to care a lot about inheritance, but they are not eager to put lots of effort into it. Probably, I grew up with the idea that probably the issue there is that the heir usually is not as interested as the owner of the funds into Bitcoin. So it's still something new, and probably they are a little bit scared that their heir screws up. So at some point, maybe it's easier to use custodians or exchanges for that. So I think this is one of the reasons for inheritance being overlooked. while recovery being overlooked, probably sometimes we overlook at how good we are at setting up our own custody setups, and we think it will never fail. But I think it's better to be prepared than sorry later. So yeah, that's my two thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you breaking that down for us. And I know recently Liana launched something called Liana for Business, which is a nice, exciting new development in your world. What's the biggest pain point that you're solving there?
Yeah, we realized that the main pain point for businesses is not actually price volatility, but being able to access in a correct way their funds. So for businesses, going with custodians is the easiest option at the moment, but there is a big risk of counterparty, with custodians and with exchanges and this kind of stuff. So this is a big barrier to entry for business, in our opinion. The other option is doing some do-it-yourself setup, which currently, without using Liana, in our opinion, is, or without using complicated, more complicated setups as Liana are forced to do, is very risky, and not many businesses are eager to do this by themselves. And also there is very little auditability and role division of roles inside the different key management owner and key management participant and this kind of stuff. So with Liana for Business, we try to fill this gap and let the business be safe from third parties failing, but at the same time being able to be auditable for boards and for board members and chief officer and this kind of stuff. And at the same time relying on recovery options, as I explained before, with time locks, and be flexible with the policies. So how it works is that businesses usually would also rely on our expertise, since we provide an onboarding for businesses to manage the definition of the setup. So we help the businesses defining how they should best manage their own funds, because we are the experts, so we want to bring the expertise. And then they set up a wallet with Liana. They divide the different keys to different, let's say, stakeholders, and they are fully auditable by board members, for example, and they can safely rely on the Bitcoin protocol, enforcing all the policies without needing to trust third parties, and being able at the same time to recover in case of disaster happening, or, for example, key rotation, for example, some people departing from the company and this kind of stuff. This is done in a very smooth way thanks to Liana technology, and we applied to that the whole, let's say, consulting of onboarding businesses together with us included in the service.
Gotcha. And my last question for you, Manuel, is I'm sure you've piqued the interest of a lot of people out there, especially with this Liana for Business program that you're offering, or product. So what types of businesses or organizations should be using Liana right now, and which ones do you think will adopt it next? And if they were interested, where can I send them to go to get more info on this? So
I think Liana, due to the flexibility of Liana is very flexible because it lets you use a vast possibility of templates. So you can either use just one key for your first spending option and one key for the recovery option, but you can use many keys for the first option and many other keys for the recovery option. So I think Liana is usable for all kind of businesses. What we suggest, what we have in mind is that more complex businesses, or businesses that have higher complexity, both in terms of people involved and governance, and maybe also the amount of Bitcoin involved, should rely on something as secure as Liana, not they shouldn't accept lower security, and I think it's the best security out there. So, but maybe I am a bit biased. Anyway, I think it's it's suitable for every kind of business, but maybe small businesses can even use Liana without our onboarding. Even if I suggest double checking with us, because better safe than sorry. But maybe bigger businesses are the ones that could take more advantage in terms of our expertise and our product. This is my opinion, but we also just launched, so we are very curious about which businesses will be more attracted by it, even if we already know that businesses are securing also significant amount of Bitcoin already with Liana, doing it by themselves, let's say.
Yeah, and if businesses out there wanted to get more information to see if they'd be a good fit for something like Liana, what's the best place I can send them?
Yeah, I can suggest to go to our website. It's wizardsardine.com/Liana, but there is a new website that is called lianawallet.com/business. So that's the best way, perfect, in my opinion, to start. You can book an onboarding there, and we can start from there. We can start by chatting, just having a small chat, and then we can have a full onboarding.
Well, if the chat was anything like ours, I certainly encourage everyone out there to go do it. And Manuel, we really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your time, and your insights with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here on the show. And hopefully we'll have you again real soon, my friend. And thanks for all the great products you and the team at Liana are building. These are things that we're going to need now and in the future. And we're excited we got stewards like you, driving the ship in the right direction. So thank you so much for that and your time today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and for your time and interest. And it was a pleasure for me to chat with you, and hope that everything was well with the direct. Thank you.
Oh, you did great. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you real soon, Manuel. We'll be back here on the Blockchain Report in just a second after this quick break, so stay tuned. All right, gang, well, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Blockchain Report, but be sure to stay tuned here at RoxomTV. So are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin? Well, I sure am, and the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. All right, gang, now I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us here on the Blockchain Report. We're here each and every day, and we certainly appreciate you tuning in to get more of today's top news with us. And if you haven't already, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to RoxomTV, RoxomTV News, and Hank at RoxomTV on all platforms you choose to do your doom scrolling on. And make sure you're staying tuned to RoxomTV right now, because coming up next, we have my good friend Walker America and his show coming on board, and you are not going to want to miss it. Walker, how are you, my friend? Happy Tuesday. What you got in store for the gang today on the show?
It's going to be a fun one. We're going to have Joe Nakamoto joining us. He's also a Roxom host. Got to be cross-pollinating amidst the Roxom family here. But a number of things I want to talk about. I mean, just when Bitcoin bears started dancing on Bitcoin's premature grave, boom, Bitcoin pops back above 92,000 infinitely printable US dollars per Bitcoin. Strategy just hit the 650,000 Bitcoin milestone and is apparently stacking some fiat too. What's going on there? We've got Vanguard finally bending the knee, opening up Bitcoin ETFs to their clients. Turns out their CEO was right that Bitcoin ETFs would not be offered under his watch because he's not their CEO anymore. And then Trump getting ready to pump everyone's bags, including his own very large bags, seems to be on the near horizon. It's a fun time, Hank. We're having fun here, reminding people to do as Odell would say, stay humble and stack sats. But in the meantime, we're going to try and break down everything that's going on. So it should be a fun show.
Yeah, I mean, you got a lot of fodder there, and Joe Nakamoto is just as good as anyone else to chat about it. So everybody make sure you're staying tuned for everything that's going on here in Roxom TV next. Walker, I wish you, Joe, and the masses out there a great show, and we'll probably see you soon enough, my friend. Thanks for tuning in.
Take it easy, Hank. Cheers.
All right, we're taking a break, but when we're back, stay tuned. We got Walker America and his show breaking it down for you right here on Roxom TV, here at the Blockchain Report. We'll see you next time. Enjoy your Tuesday.